are settled in, I would like you to think about a new spot to move to. Now, if I was at school, I'd number you off and all that, but maybe if you could think about being, spouses try to separate, not sit by your spouse, and if you can think about being with some people, maybe not that you don't know quite as well, and maybe people, different age groups or whatever. So if you could get up and find a new spot, find a new group, please. So.
That a lot of conflict was developing at some tables, and we thought the only way to avoid conflict in the church is to rearrange people, so that's really why we did that. Not really. You don't take me seriously in everything I say, but most of it. There are 2 pages on your handout, incidentally, that we are not going to talk about. Common expectations for partnerships and specific suggestions from our experiences. You can go over those, and I think they're pretty self-evident, but we wanted them to be down in writing for you. Now we aim this afternoon to turn our attention to the writing of a worship statement, so maybe let us fill in the background a little bit on our own experience in that. In that handout of chapter 3, I think it's about page 73, you have a copy of the worship statement of our congregation. It's kind of an abridged copy, draft, I think, but it just gives you an idea of what's there. I'll just point to it now. We're not going to go through it. But let me tell you a couple things about it. Number one is how it was developed. We made the process that writing a worship statement is a process, and it is slow and sometimes cumbersome because it is very important that that not be written by one person. It needs to be the congregation's voice, not one person's voice. And so there is no one person who is the author of ours, for instance. It was mine and Norma's and the worship committee and the elders, and back to the worship committee and to Norma and to me and the worship committee and the elders. It was probably an 8 to 10 month process, as I recall it, with plenty of careful drafting and editing. So it's a slow process. The second thing you should bear in mind is that when you have a worship statement, it's very easy for it to be put in a file and ignored, like a lot of other vision statements or documents or reports. And that'd be the worst thing to happen to this. It needs to be used on a regular basis. We put it in a pamphlet that was in the narthex of the church, readily, visibly available to everybody, and we sort of kept an eye on how often they disappeared, and we had to replenish it. It was used in instruction for new members who came to the congregation. Every year when new members came on the worship committee, a third of them did, we went through it with the committee. Every year when new council members came on, we went through it with them, so it became an alive document that people were very much aware of in the congregation. So keep some of those things in mind.
And because it was an alive document, it lives and breathes, and it needs to be revisited. It's not like you do this and then you're done for 20 years. You need to revisit this every 3 to 5 years to see what needs to be adjusted or refreshed along the way.
Okay, now for our exercises this afternoon, each of your tables should take a moment and appoint somebody who is the scribe at your table. Somebody who knows how to write, it should be. Can hold a pen and move it in the right direction in a quasi-readable way. me. All right, now that the draft has taken place, let me raise a question first. Norma's going to write now in some of the comments you make. How would you describe, let me back up, a worship statement must be unique and tailored to each congregation. You cannot just adopt somebody else's worship statement because their personality as a congregation may be different than yours, even though their theology is similar. Their culture may be different. So let's start out talking about Covenant Church. How would you describe the worship now of Covenant CRC? Just use one or two words and we're going to put them on the board. In other words, if I were a visitor moving to Sioux Center, considering the different, or if I were a pastor, I'm applying for your position, and I, as a pastor or as a visitor in town, say, what's the worship life at Covenant like? What words would you use to describe it? Put a bunch of them together.
Just
Word-centered.
Word-centered. Okay. Intergenerational.
what was the second one? Thoughtful. Okay.
Eclectic. Next one. Predictable. Predictable. Someone else?
Confused.
What?
Confused.
Confused?
Yeah.
Okay. Who's confused?
I would say that the
Not a clear concept of it?
yes.
Oh,
And
I thought you meant a confused pastor will serve best here.
yeah. The visitor would not know which book to use, whether to find a liturgy on
Yeah.
the screen or in the bulletin or in the book. Maybe.
You want to say inhospitable?
In the Bibles.
Okay, not always sure where to find the resources or,
Confused, depending on which Sunday you attended. You
And
would
which
know
service on
what
Sunday
type of
you
service to expect. There
so variable? Variable?
Inconsistent?
All right.
I would say we're polarized between the morning service and the evening service in terms of
AM and PM polarized? Okay. Others? Stuffy.
Experimental.
Somehow I have a hard time putting those two together.
Stuffily experimental. We're experimenting with being stuffy.
Lots of people involved.
Many involved.
Somber.
What was that?
Somber.
Somber.
Intellectual.
Intellectual. Okay. Anyone else yet?
Spirit-filled.
Spirit-filled. Okay, can you keep that floating around as we move ahead? Let me make an observation. How contradictory some of these are. Isn't that interesting? Which shows that perceptions about worship among 10 people will have 8 different perceptions. You may get 2 of them to agree. Now, that says something about the need to clarify some issues and about the need to be patient with each other. Okay? Now, let's talk about the church. Tell us what things shaped Covenant CRC to be the church that it is. and from two directions. Number one, what things in history, in the history of covenant, shaped us? And then after that, let's ask, what events in our experiences, say in the last 5 years, have shaped us? Every 3 to 5 years, a congregation goes through a major change. Personality change, the issues are different, the people are different. We're not usually very conscious of that, but we do. So first, what history here has shaped covenant to be who it is?
Transplants to the community. The people coming in were transplants.
Dordt College transplanted people.
Not just Dordt transplants, there were people from surrounding towns that also came.
Okay, so the transplant idea is broader than the Dordt idea. Okay. Transplant, Dordt. What else shaped you? Women in office. Okay. Children's role in worship. Other things?
Maybe the decision to make the evening service, the service with praise teams and the more contemporary style.
Evening is more contemporary praise teams.
Yeah, that's historically was a very conscious decision made about 15 or more years ago.
That was a conscious decision. How old is Covenant Church?
40, next year, 40 years.
40 years? Okay.
I think when it started, you could call it experimental. We like to try different things.
Oh, okay. Openness to being experimental.
Yeah, innovative, whatever.
If,
I came here in 1984, and the congregation had relatively recently moved into this building. They had been meeting in a gymnasium before that, and there was a strong emphasis on small groups and trying innovative worship styles. And I think what I experienced when I arrived, people who left for CRC to form this congregation wanted that sort of emphasis of a more innovative worship style and a closer relationship within these small groups.
Okay, let's say small groups and innovation.
okay, can I ask a couple survey questions here? How many of you have been members of Covenant Church for 40 years? How many have been here for the history of the congregation for 40 years?
40 years? Yeah.
Okay. How many of you have been members for 5 years or less? How many of you have been members here for 10 to 15 years? Okay.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Small groups and someone else? Okay, what experiences in the past 5 years then have reshaped the life of this congregation? Can you identify some? Women in office, that would be there. Okay.
Another dynamic that involved, and this is sort of a delicate thing, but administration, faculty, tension that caused people to leave this fellowship because they couldn't.
You're talking about Dordt.
At Dordt, yes, at Dordt, administrative faculty tension that caused people to leave this fellowship because they couldn't worship next to some of the people that they had to
So some tensions outside the congregation affected life inside the congregation. Okay, back to women in office. Do you have women elders? How many right now? 2? How long have you had them? 5 years? About 5 years? Okay.
I think the presence in the community of a more contemporary style congregation, and that being an option for people to leave this church and go to another church that had worship style they liked. You mean Bridge? Yeah, I think in the last, 15 years, 10 years.
Okay, so their
Options for worship style.
their experience here made it easier for them to go to Bridge of Hope.
Well, it's just the fact that there's more options for worship style now than there were 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. More worship style options available now.
In community, okay.
Emphasis on creation care.
Emphasis on creation care. Okay, that's a new one. Anything else you can think of?
Well, I think now the leaving of our pastor. But are still going to come to the table?
That's a new to children.
Okay.
Children at the Lord's table.
Okay.
Are you doing that? Okay. Okay, let's keep that in mind as we move on. Take your chapter a minute, will you, the handout from the chapter, and take a look at page 84 and 85, and then we will be ready to go to work. The box on page 85 summarizes really what's happening on a number of those pages. The process of writing a worship statement, I told you this took 8 to 10 months in our experience. I just want you to see how it normally happens, at least in our setting and many others, so you can fix this in your mind. Number one, a group discussion to identify our needs. And some of that has come up now in this. We'll talk about that more. But the emphasis there is on group and needs. Any one of you individually may make a list of the needs of this congregation, which may be very different from the list of needs that the person at the next table comes up with. And so a group exercise is necessary. 2, appointment of those responsible for writing. Notice it's plural, those. Plural writing is far more difficult, but it's necessary in this situation. 3, a group study of the scriptures on worship as preparation for the writing. After all, that's our basis. 4, 5, and 6 is research. What materials has the denomination provided? We're part of a fellowship, we're part of a tradition. We express ourselves within those boundaries. What are the other documents in the history of this congregation? Position statements, minutes. What have other authors said on the subject from which we could benefit? And then 7, a review of worship statements from other congregations. There are, I didn't count them exactly, I suspect 10 or 12 just in this chapter that we have included. And finally, the formulation of the worship statement with editing, reformulating, editing, drafting, editing, reformulating, editing. That can be a testy process, but it's worth it. Do not lose patience in that process. Okay, any questions so far?
Are you scared?
Okay, then you're
That's okay.
alert enough to be doing it.
Are we moving our words like happy with.
You will not. You will not, therefore, write a statement that is 20 pages long, dealing with all of those specifics. You will write a statement, you should write a statement, that deals with the broad strokes, the principles we work with, understanding that this is not a cure-all. Every Christian Reformed congregation, I'll broaden that out. Every Christian congregation today is riddled with different opinions about worship. That's the nature of today. That simply happens to be the time we're living in. It will remain that way. Our aim is not to resolve that and to remove that, but to give us a clear enough statement so we as a group can walk through it in a way that will avoid fracturing dangerously. So that you will still reach some of those, you will still experience some of those tensions that are on the board, but hopefully there will be a spirit of understanding that will make you aware that is normal. Number two, how to hold them in boundaries so you don't damage each other in the process. And number three, how to find middle ground to blend in the middle of that. And number four, how to be patient with each other. Now, when we wrote this, I don't want to hold up a fancy statement before you and say, it solved all of that in Hillcrest Church. It did not. It did not. But if I can go back to the illustration about just the obvious one, how do you decide whether that guy should show his infomercial, drama about potluck on morning worship? Those kinds of issues give you criteria to discuss them and work them through. I would guess, that's a fictitious situation. He may be unhappy with the decision of the committee, but the committee had criteria to work with. And so you will still have tensions. That is the lot of the Christian church today. Our aim is to hold them within a manageable, boundaried area.
There's huge positive energy in consensus building. And if you love each other as church, you work for that consensus.
But there's a big difference between consensus building and achieving unanimity. You will not achieve unanimity. No church ever does. But you need to work at achieving consensus building so that I can say, I'm not particularly happy with the way we do such and such, but I see the big picture, I endorse that, I love it, and I'll support it. And retain the right. I belong to a congregation now after I retired that by and large I love, and it serves me well. There are things there I don't like. I wish they'd do it differently. I have to accept that and love them in spite of it. It's sort of like a family, a marriage, a friendship. So, anyone else? Nice balance of both. This is future-oriented. As we look to the future, we want to keep this in mind. Good, thanks. Okay, how about one more question, and that is, can you give me one word that would express the needs of Covenant CRC today? Pardon?
Diverse.
Diverse. So how diverse people can relate to each other. Someone else?
I think we need to communicate between the ages.
Communicate between ages. Communication. Someone else?
Openness. Openness.
Openness in that communication, you mean? Hmm? Got another one, new pastor. Pretty obvious, isn't it?
Trust. Okay.
I don't know if this is something we're talking about. I think we need to grow over the years that I've been here between people moving or choosing other congregations or for a variety of reasons. I just feel like our numbers go down and down and down and you get this dispirited kind of. The singing is more quiet. So I just feel like we need to grow.
Okay. Confidence and optimism that comes with growth. Pardon? Identity. Clarify our identity.
Somebody who left here, when Pastor Herm said he was retiring, said that covenant should take a year off without a pastor to figure out who they are before they got a new pastor. And I said, no way, forget it, we don't need that. But now as I sit here and listen to all this, I almost start to feel that he had a little bit of point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you all hear that? Huh? Herm was right when he said you should take a year off.
It wasn't Herm.
Oh, it wasn't Herm. Oh. Okay, somebody said when Herm retired, take a year off and figure out our identity issues, which is usually a good thing.
I think there is a need for more intergenerational worship, a great need for it, especially for those of us with young children who don't feel like our children reap any benefits from the service. I think it looks differently to the generations in the congregation, but for us with children in church right now, there's a great need for them to be part of it.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a lot more than one word, intergenerational.
No, I think we'll take that whole paragraph and value it.
I think that kids are given great opportunities to read and sing and be part of the service, but they just don't relate to if they're not.
Right, it's not participation in the service per se, more like while we're sitting and singing and listening to the service, there's not a lot that reaches them, I think. I think there could be more. I think there's a really big need for it.
Okay. How about getting at some more specific writing then? On the back of your handouts, there is a worksheet that all of you will be interested in, but particularly your scribe. And those are the three that we're going to work through now. And go back into your handout and notice the worship statements that are there.
That would be in the chapter. Okay.
Oh, in the chapter handout, yeah. And there are, I didn't count them, 8 or 10 that are in there. I would say take a few minutes and browse through those and identify some sections of this one, that one, the other one, that just seem particularly valuable to you for the sake of this congregation and its needs right now, and cite them as a group, and your scribe will write them down. I should tell you, this sheet that your scribe is writing on, we'll be talking about them verbally, but those sheets will go to Jill. That will be valuable information for her, so don't write any bad things about Jill on it. Is that clear? Look through those sample statements, identify sections that seem particularly valuable to you and valuable for Covenant Church.
And we're talking about 15, 20 minutes here, okay?
Yeah.
So take the time to do it carefully.
What you Okay. Let's pull together now and share some of our insights for one another. Scribes will kind of count on you at this point. Let's hear from you on what sections of those samples you looked at seem particularly valuable to you given your situation. Obviously, this is not what all you're going to write about it, but point to the sections that made you think, oh, that could help Covenant. Let's start over there. Who's your scribe in the corner? You think you? I'll bet you are then.
One of the themes that came out is participatory, but I'm not sure we came to a conclusion on what that meant. So it came from two angles, that you can participate individually, but you also can participate communally. We want to both and. To be able to participate together is different than being called on to do something individually, and there was a need for both. So that was one of the themes or ideas that can be sort of written out. We all agree on participatory, but we don't want to leave one out at the expense of the other.
Yeah, they sound pretty impressed with what you said. Yeah. Okay. Anything else over there?
That's pretty significant for 15 minutes.
Music was brought up and talked about and discussed as, what does it mean? How does it work through us? And why is it more important or less important than the spoken word that we do in worship? And I guess we left with a sense that there's something unique about music that we carry with us. But that seems to be something we should truly write out.
So participation and the role of music. Okay. How about here, this table? Who's your scribe and what did you find?
Yes, he is. He's pointing at us. We did not appoint a scribe because no one dared ask anyone to do it.
So who's the scribe?
Well, I'll just tell you what we talked about. I've never written down. We liked sample 2. We got that far and we really liked the way it was done. Positively stated. The first one, well, I won't go with the first one, but and then of sample 2, we liked starting off very boldly with our worship is reformed, we thought it would be. And then paragraph 4, we talked a lot about what inclusive means versus what inclusive of all ages means as opposed to what intergenerational means. I'm not sure that we know the answer to that yet. But those are the two things that we thought sort of yelled Covenant at us.
Okay. Over here?
Did I tell the truth?
Okay, to add something different to the next, I think one of the things that caught our eye is that congregations desire order, but also warmth. We felt that we have order. We even felt that we have elements that would indicate warmth, whether that be shares, joys, concerns, readers, whatever else. But yet there's a feeling that somehow among those elements we still need to and can improve. So we're asking ourselves, well, what aspects of our church that we have that provide the warmth that we need within the body, but also to those that actually come to visit our congregations.
Okay. Everybody hear that? Any questions?
There would be a section that talked about order in the sample to have both.
Aim for both.
And we said that warmth came from familiarity with the songs. And then we went over to our children and we said, sure, it'd be nice for our kids to be able, school-age children to be able to sing some songs that they know as well. That would be wonderful.
How about this table?
Okay, on sample one, we agreed with the reform and Catholic, thought that, well, Catholic was on another one, but felt that was something that was valuable. Inclusive within generations, we thought was valuable, but especially with the songs. And we got a little sidetracked on the songs because we said that kids do not relate to songs that are sung in the morning worship service, and we kind of decided it was because they're not familiar with them. They're more familiar with praise and worship songs, so they sing them out and get into them. But songs out of the Psalter hymnal, they don't really know them, so they don't really get into them and relate to them.
Or out of Saint Peter.
Or out of even the Sings to New Creation book. And then in sample two, we talked about participatory is valuable, and we felt like there is participation, but it's not for all ages. I mean, the congregation is participating in different liturgies and things like that, but the kids aren't related to. And it also talked about grace, and we thought that probably was our worship time is. Herm was very good about that, making him very gracious, but that probably was a better description than a warm and personal, was the grace comes out. And then that worship flows from the gospel in sample 3. We thought that was very valuable, the Bible-based gospel.
We had some of the same things, of course, as Elsa said. From the fourth sample, we appreciated that even children have a role to play. From the third one, engage with the purpose of music to bear the living verse of the gospel. I forget about that right. We appreciated that. We appreciated from sample 3 also that worship is not just a human activity, but that it is the dialogue with God. We appreciated the clear statement of identity that sample 2 gave. And we appreciated the need to be warm and personal that sample 1 talked about. And agreed that we need to work harder at that in our church.
Over here.
Yeah, we also touched a bit on this idea that the triune God serves us in the divine service with his word and sacraments. I think sometimes we can get hung up because I don't want to say we think that we're serving God. Somehow that sounds bad, but you know, God is serving us in our services. So if we had that attitude, maybe some of our hang-ups would change a little bit. In sample number 2, we picked up a little bit on the idea of worship as vital, dynamic, and exuberance. Could we do a better job of some of that sometimes? And I mean, we also related some of these ideas of kids music, songs that kids know, and letting them be exuberant and allowing their exuberance to maybe spark our exuberance. Yeah, those were some, I don't know, we were all over that. Vague. Wrap up that we discussed.
Any questions or comments so far?
One of the things we liked especially in sample 2, number 4, was that it talked about
What page are you on?
I don't know, it's cut off at the top. Sample 2, number 4. It says that it has movement, color, drama, freshness, and a varied taste. I think we've talked about music a lot, and styles of music, because that's what we have word and we have music, but we got to remember that worship can involve color, drama, movement, freshness, pace. And And so we often just say, oh, I don't like the music, or I do like the music, but we gotta incorporate those other elements as well to offer that additional things that make us more inclusive. And I don't think we often think of things like varied pace or color.
Okay.
I agree with that. Somebody asked, why is music a part of sort of non-intellectual form of community or worship? Given that worship is an embodied experience, are there other ways that we can embody worship that is not just music?
All right. Putting those together, and I hope you've made some notes on each other's too. Before we go on to the next one, may I add a few observations on the basis of what we've done so far this afternoon and your comments, things that I've seen, spotted, and maybe missed. And this is for your benefit as someone who is sort of an objective observer of this. Number one, you have dealt, it seems to me, with three potentially very explosive issues: women in office, children at the table, and children in worship. And it sounds to me you have dealt with them very, very well, very healthily. Number one, be grateful for that, but trust your ability as a congregation to deal with such issues. You obviously can. You have proven it. And so if you feel anxiety when issues come up in the future, remind yourself, wait a minute, this congregation has the personality that we can do that. We have proven that. I think that's pretty necessary. I would also point to the fact that I think it has become clear in the comments here today that you need to cross-fertilize ideas and reactions across the generations. Your different generations are showing different reactions to Covenant Church. That's not so abnormal. However, it sets up a potential situation where you begin to wonder which generation will win. And that destroys a church. I cannot say that strongly enough. That can destroy a church. Instead of seeing which generation can win, the goal is to see that a shared vision of the congregation draws both ends of the age spectrum together so that you can share differences, and then it's a win-win situation and not a I win, you lose. And hostility and polarization happens when you do the former and not the latter. So when the issue of communication came up, aim for communication particularly across the generational divide so that each generation listens to and learns from the other. Thirdly, it's interesting how open and free you are to identify issues in the life of Covenant Church. But we missed you talking about caring and relating ministries. Now, I suspect that you are a congregation that cares for each other, but that never surfaced today. Nobody has talked about how the way we really go out of our way to help each other, to love each other, to care for each other. That bonding together, particularly of people who are not here as natives, is a critical factor in the church. And if you put more attention on that than on the issues, my guess is some of the issues will resolve themselves. Tuck that away. One more, and that is that I am a little nervous with how concerned you are about style. Those of you who were here last night heard my little spiel about it maybe. If you want to hear it again, all you got to do is push a certain button and it'll come out. Style is not near as important as most people think it is, but it is the divider. And there are issues in a congregation's life that are far more important than style. And when we make style up at the top of the list, we sort of sabotage a lot of other issues and questions that come up. And I would encourage you to be concerned about style less and other factors more. And some of that will resolve itself. Don't get sidetracked into that. Far too many CRCs have already done that. Okay, let's go on to the next one. As you begin to structure your congregation's worship statement, what issues or subjects or sections or type of outline do you suggest that it has? Now, you've started that. You've heard the concerns, the words that other groups have used. You don't have to figure out what you're going to say about each one of these, but an outline or a structure says, our worship statement ought to address this, and this, and this, and this. You know, however many you want to do. Identify them. You don't have to write a paragraph about them. We'll let you do that next week. Is that clear? 15 minutes. We'll give you a 3-minute warning. 1, 2, 3, go. Agree together on the structure, the issues, the statements that need to be included. Issues or when you're writing a paper or an article or a sermon, you end up with a long list of subjects that need to be addressed, some of which will be developed and some of which will be deleted later on, but you have to begin with a gross list. Please understand gross in the right way. Total. Let's start over here. What do you have on yours for the outline or agenda?
We actually sort of started by looking at our current mission statement as a church. You know, techie nerds over here who looked at what our mission statement is. And one thing that we then looked at was this, the phrase was a weekly gathering of joyful Christian worship accessible to all. So if that's something that's already in our church's mission statement, it seems like that should be the general overall guiding light for more particular worship statements. And we kind of, then picked up on some of those ideas, joyful, wondering, I guess we talked yesterday about the essence of worship. We were wondering, what does God want? How do we try to get at that question? That should certainly be part of our statement. How are we fed? How do we give? Etc. So those are some of the things that we discussed.
Okay, thanks. Back there.
One thing we need to realize that music serves the whole body, and so if we talk about likes and dislikes, we have to realize that what one person likes may really bless another, so we have to be tolerant of each other and be willing to put up with things. One theme I think that came on a lot, we need a lot of communication between the different ages and different generations about what is important to us, what helps us to worship well, so communication. We agreed that it's very valuable to state that we are who we are. We are a Reformed worshiping congregation, but we found it also just as important not to put too much emphasis on that word, but to describe the types of things that that means, rather than assuming that this word is something that's going to distinguish us. No, it's our actions, it's how we do. So we want to identify ourselves clearly, but also be careful about not tossing terms around without giving them a clear explanation.
Okay. I'd like to come back and address the music thing in a few minutes, but let's go around first. How about you?
Okay, you started out by saying we like the way sample 2 was worded positively. We decided that that was a good way to approach it. And then for the basic issues or ideas, we had our worship is reformed, our worship is inclusive of all ages, our worship incorporates all the arts and praise of God, our worship is a time of grace. And then underneath each one of those, followed by bullets, describe what we meant by those things.
Okay. Over here?
If the cerebral group there, guys, I've actually emphasized a statement that has a theological starting point, emphasizing grace, celebrating and affirming what we feel are positive aspects of the diversity in our congregation, some of those diverse approaches, emphasizing elements that foster community. I think those were sort of where we elaborated a lot on that. Those were two of the heads.
Okay. You see how this is taking shape now? Now you're up.
Well, we agree with this table and we didn't listen to it. But we like the way that sample 2 was worded as well, that our worship is, our worship is. And we thought perhaps there should be one that says our worship will build the body of Christ, or will strengthen the community of Christ, or something like that. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about that. And then, I don't know what we did after that.
Picking up on what you just said about community, I think one of the strengths of congregation we talk about, something we want to continue is a full body life outside of worship, and especially growing community together. So a worship statement that pulls us in from those other aspects of our ministry and pushes us back out.
Okay.
So that our worship is of a piece of our ministry.
The gathering and the scattering. Good one. We are up to you.
Probably some redundancy here in terms of what was said before, but
That's good.
our discussion probably revolved, I was trying to summarize it, around maybe 3 points that came out to say, look at the headings here. What kind of headings would we create in a statement? And something like participants, purpose, and path, sort of the object of our worship, the purpose, the what and why, and the path, the how. If we could flesh those 3 out, might lay the foundation, and then the path, where we generally have already wrestled with a lot of our issues, hopefully we can build on those first 2. And we know that some of those examples did, but within that path, when we talk a little bit about, we want to make sure that we can talk together in worship, just as we're cataloging this. So the arrows we talked about more non things.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? Seems to me you made good progress in this round. Let me come back just a minute to the music thing. Why is it that everybody gets edgy? No, let me back up. Music always comes up, and everybody always gets edgy when it comes up. And there are a couple reasons for that on the one hand, I think are very reasonable. Number one, what has split churches more than theology? Music. What has the potential of fracturing our healthy congregation? Music. What involves everybody in church? Music. I mean, music is the one thing, by music I mean song, is the one part of a worship service that, when done well, involves everybody. Nobody is left out. Everybody is involved. Music touches the spirit and the soul. And anything that touches the spirit and the soul, you put great energy into, either in liking it or not liking it. It just is very natural that it's such an earnest concern of ours. And we live in a society today where we have 3 influences on us. One is the church's history, we have a history of music ever since the Protestant Reformation. That's strong. We have a contemporary music society that is, because of CDs and everything else, pushing tightly in on us. And we have a secular society with some very different values of music, and we're caught in the collision of those three. And so it's bound to be that, that kind of an issue that stirs up great energy.
Why does music overshadow the other arts when it comes to worship?
I think mostly because it is the one place in worship where you are all participating. Okay? If you have drama, you are watching, you are participating in it. Art is a visual that you experience by watching. You're not actually doing something.
Well, I thought about music. Ken Callahan wrote a book, Dynamic Worship. I don't know if any of you have read it. Callahan says 40% of the power in a worship service comes from the music. 40% of the power. And now he's a theologian, a musician, and a pastor. He says, because it has 40% of the power, if I preach a sermon that is a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10, and the music in that service is great, people will hear that sermon, the 4, as an 8. If I have a sermon that's an 8, and we have a musician or musicians that simply stumble around and kill the keyboard, they will hear my 8 as a 4. It's true. That's why it stirs all of this. Okay, next step, last one. We're involved in a process here, and I think as you reflect on this afternoon, you will realize this process has gained significant momentum. I think it has, and you will benefit from that. Where do we go from here? Next steps in the process, particularly who should be involved? Who should be involved in the writing, crafting of this worship statement, and why? So we'll give you about 10 minutes for that one. Who should be involved and why? Okay, for this one, you don't have to tell us specific names of people in the congregation who ought to be involved in it, but if you have them, be sure they're written on the sheet, because remember, we'd like you to turn in that sheet. But the types of persons, the roles of persons, the groups who should be involved. Let's be miscellaneous. We'll start with you this time. Go for it.
To start with musicians, planners, writers, would be one group.
Say that again?
The musicians and the planners.
Musicians and
The ones that are
planners.
actually here, we need some representatives there. And then from there, representatives from elders, someone who has the ability to build consensus issue. Beyond whether they're connected with working or not, they build consensus building to navigate that right from the vision statement. Look for somebody like that. Somebody that has a historical covenant. Many of us haven't seen covenant through the years. We've only known covenant as this block from years. Somebody that connects us
would also be good people to include writing age. But at the end, we thought, we also have to be aware of writing a vision statement. It's very difficult to do with 35 people.
Good. Over here. You want a mic? You got one.
Well, we wanted a representation of all of the age groups present, but we did want a clear appointed leader as well. Lots of different voices, but one or more people who should be the actual writers. We talked about how could we bring input from the congregation into this. We have a pastoral group system in place, and we thought perhaps in some way we could employ that pastoral group system with a group of structured, positively formulated questions to gather input. We feel the worship coordinator should be involved, and perhaps a larger committee of people representing elders and other in place structures and committees, as well as diverse people from the congregation. They should all be involved. I hope I represented us all right.
All right. Right here.
I've been checking them off as we go along, and the only thing that we had in addition to all of the above, no, not really, is someone who's non-musical, who doesn't plan worship, who doesn't even know what goes into all of this.
All right. Over here. You want a mic? I'm not
I
sure.
think a couple of other characteristics that we were looking for were members, or certainly a couple of members who know how to be decisive, that it isn't just an ongoing discussion, but kind of reaches a point. A desire for conciseness. We would like to have somebody who is a visionary as well, and looking for somebody who is knowledgeable in the area of worship, has a bit of background, and then also somebody who's passionate about worship as well.
Good. Over there.
We were really impressed with Ethan's use of alliteration earlier. When he had the participants, the purpose, and the past, so we thought he should write it. We sort of discussed like the idea of having concentric kind of rings, like having a group of, and this has kind of been brought up, a group of 2 or 3 people, including Ethan, to do the final writing of it. And then sort of around that, there's a group of our current liturgy planners, you know, other people, artists, sound people, maybe, you know, I don't know that we have that many theologians left around, but, you know, and maybe even that could involve some sort of book study in a group to kind of distill what actually I should start on the outside, because on the outside, just get as wide a swath as you possibly can, just to do similar things to what we're doing. Throw words out, brainstorm, have a big brainstorm session, have that, then just kind of get whittled down a little bit.
Thank you.
I think we included the elders.
We included the elders, the members of the worship committee, the worship coordinator, and representatives of different ages and genders. And we thought it would be good to include people who attended this conference, who had participated in this process as much as possible, because then you're not starting from zero again. It would be building on what we've done here.
Thank you. That's not really a mic, it's just a lollipop. Don't be scared. Any questions you want to follow up with? Make sure your sheet is turned in or left on the table or given to Jill, so it becomes very good material for planning ahead. Anyone question?
We just had a question that maybe you could address. How important is the pastor involved? We had that question at the beginning, involved in this at all. Is this before we call pastor?
What's the up and downside of keeping it a small thing?
Right.
If you have a pastor on hand at the time, he or she should absolutely be included. Given the fact that you're vacant, I would not encourage you to put off the writing of this statement until a pastor comes. A matter of fact, it may be a very helpful tool in the search process, but it takes a while to write it, and most worship statements are reviewed and updated every several years. So if a new pastor comes on, he's surely going to have the opportunity to be involved in updating it come a couple years down the road. If I were in a position and considering a congregation, I would value hearing from them what their worship statement is. I would want that as I consider the call. So don't wait. Don't wait.
Who then should decide who this committee's going to be, or who's going to be on the committee?
Who should decide? Who to include, etc.?
Former committees.
I'm going to say, what's that? No, we want to decide. Then you don't need a committee. If there's a worship committee or the worship committee with Jill working with the elders. The elders are ultimately responsible for the worship life of the church. And the elders should be evaluating the worship life of the church regularly, and so this would properly fall under that part of their supervision.
What role does expertise play in this kind of, like, is it good to have someone who knows a lot about music, let's say? I mean, with Dorothy, we have music talks and this kind of thing around. Is that, in general, in your experience, is it good to have people with expertise, or does that actually tend to be counterproductive? Sometimes people know a little too much, and it's not always, right? People come with too many, I want to see this and this happen, and maybe that's not actually helpful to the collaborative process.
Should I just do that one a little bit?
Sure.
I think it really is important to have somebody who has musical background, but I think whoever you have has to have also a pastoral sense. I never talked about myself as a musician, I talked about myself as a pastoral musician. Relationships are more important.
Musicians should be involved. Musicians with a proper personality should be involved.
I mean, not just musicians, the same goes for theologians, and this, we have a lot of people who are experts in things floating around this town.
Given this afternoon, now do you understand why we said this morning, I think we ought to talk about collaboration first. There are ways to sabotage everything by not collaborating well. Certain people collaborate. You need collaborators to do this. Okay, I hope you have found this valuable and interesting, and that it brings good fruit very soon and long through the future. Let me tell you that for the two of us, this has been a very stimulating experience for us to be here, and I marvel at the commitment level in a congregation that can bring a group like this together in August on Saturday. I have to tell you, there are not many CRCs that would do that, really. So thank you very much, and for the investment you have in it. I have enjoyed it very much. I know Norma has too. We are going to have prayer and we're going to sing, but Norma has a couple reflections first too.
Okay, so we planned worship and were involved in congregational life together for 24 years. And we loved it. It was a passion, and we just thrilled to have the privilege of doing it. We left that 10 years ago. We don't plan worship anymore. But we work with people who are learning how to plan worship. So we work with college kids and we work with seminarians. And what we have found over the last 10 years is how much more deeply college students are thinking about worship. They don't want to do the bland. They don't want to do what everybody expects they want them to do. And I have a plea, I guess, for churches that they encourage the upcoming leaders, whether they be seminary trained or just college trained, that you encourage them and help them to be all God has called them to be. Don't get so caught into your own ideas of what it should be. Respect what they are learning to do, because they have deep passion and deep love for the Lord and for the church.
So thanks to you very much, and blessings on you and all your efforts ahead. Would you stand and let's have prayer. Take your Psalms for All Season book and turn to page 872. That's Psalm 133D. You may sing it when we sing it in whichever language you prefer. I prefer English.
872.
872.
And one other thing to note is that that refrain that begins is repeated each time, okay? And there's 3 stanzas.
Okay, let's have prayer. We have been together, Lord, for a variety of hours now. We have thought, we have prayed, we have laughed, we have talked, we have evaluated, we've gotten to know each other. We've reflected deeply on your church, on this congregation. We've shared our concerns, we've gained insight from each other. We've tried to put it all together in a way that we can be better members of covenant and make this church a place that will bring honor and glory to you. Bless each of us in our roles, all of those in leadership roles in this congregation, Jill in her role. We pray for the search committee and the search for a new pastor, and we pray that you will bring one soon who will lead us in a very healthy, Spirit-inspired way. Thanks for these hours together, and now guide us in the hours and the days ahead. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
And I will play this through one time so that you have a clue of how this works before you try to